Wilson, Vice Chair.
I'm Deputy Kirsten Morel, Minister for Sustainable Economic Development.
Tom Harvey, Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of Jersey.
Heath Harvey, Head of Local Economy within the Department of the Economy. Welcome. Thanks again for coming in, and welcome to any members of the public who might be listening in now or subsequently on the streaming. So, Minister, this is about the budget that we have in front of us, and from an economic, sports and culture perspective, can I ask what discussion and influence you've had in the formation of the proposed budget for 25 to 28?
Yeah, so as a member of the Council of Ministers, I took part in a series of workshops. There were about 10 in total, in which we agreed in principle the budget and the basic concepts behind the budget. And obviously I was a part of those discussions throughout.
That's fine, thank you. And thank you. I think you're starting off keeping the answers quite brief, and I know some of the answers might be more complex, but that's a good sign.
It was only my first.
I'll try and do the same. No, it's a good way. Can I just ask, in terms of those meetings, do you tend to bring your assistant ministers along with you, or would it be purely ministers, or does it depend on the need?
I believe there was a standing invitation to assistant ministers and council ministers meetings. I believe that assistant ministers were involved, though my memory is now feeling very unsure about that, but I believe assistant ministers were involved in those discussions. I stand to be corrected if I'm wrong.
Thank you. So the panel also notes that there's only one item of new expenditure, the minimum income standards, which will be one of the key things we'll be discussing. Can you talk us through consideration that you took as Minister in proposing any other revenue expenditure items, and why these might not have been taken forward?
Yeah, so if I start with a revenue expenditure item that I perhaps would have liked to put forward, would have been increased funding for Visit Jersey, etc. That would have been one, because the £20 million package of support for the minimum wage, that's being delivered as part of that, because I believe that will help improve productivity within the sector. That was my main thinking going in, but because of that support package, it didn't need to be done through the wider kind of budget briefings, budget meetings.
So what is the reduction to Visit Jersey?
Oh, there isn't a reduction. No, it's just about wanting. Visit Jersey have had £5 million every year for the last 10 years, so there's been a real terms reduction in that sense, and so I felt it would have been important to increase that.
Yeah.
And that is happening through the productivity support scheme.
I see.
Through that kind of package, but outside of that, I don't believe I made any requests, because it was made very clear that this was a government that wanted to get a grip of expenditure. So it was made very clear that growth bids would not be entertained.
Yeah.
And therefore, I am a department, and I know that my colleagues agree with me. We are a department that likes to do as asked in terms of whether it's budget cuts, budgetary discipline. We pride ourselves on not overspending, things like this.
Can I ask, is there a risk to your department or to the wider economic outlook if budgets are either frozen or grants are not are reduced? So, for example, I know it's not immediately on your budget, but it may have an impact on the wider economy. Things like the budget, the grant to Jersey Finance not being maybe what it could have been. Do you think those things might have either a short or medium term impact on economic activity and investment in Jersey?
I think they could have an indirect impact, certainly, and definitely, where there have been areas of growth in the budget, the economy, except outside of the minimum income standard, isn't one that has experienced growth. In fact, we are expected to find savings. So in that sense, I believe that there could be indirect impact on the economy.
And is that a risk?
I believe it is a risk, but what I would say is I do think that the big economic feature in the budget is the minimum wage and the support package below that, and that support package does some really good things for the economy, and it's all really focused on helping businesses invest in themselves to become more productive. So from that perspective, I'm content that there is £10 million a year effectively for the economy. It's just not being delivered through the normal methods, which would be, here's an ALO, or here's a part of my department. We would like to increase the budget there. It's coming in from a different mechanism, which is a support package. So in that sense, I think the risk has been mitigated.
We'll come back to that. I think we've got questions about that later. If I can pass to Deputy Andrews.
Thank you very much, Chair. The panel is very much aware of statistics jazing the reduction they have seen this year in their finances, and I just wanted to ask you whether you have given consideration for the economics unit to carry out any particular work, and what is that work going to be?
So the economics unit are currently looking at the development of a minimum income standard. That's probably the key piece of statistical work that's being undertaken. And that's in response to a desire to have an understanding of the actual reality of the cost of living in Jersey for different families. Maybe I'll ask
Absolutely. And just on that broader point as well, we can't replicate what Stats Jersey do. They are statisticians who do everything in a very controlled, statistical way, and that's very important. We would never couldn't replicate what they do. But we can add to that as well. And we're actually having conversations with the IOD along with the Minister at the moment about a survey that they might do with businesses in the future. I think we're meeting with them again in 2 or 3 weeks to see what they can do to understand, so that we can understand what business sentiment is out there in a slightly different way. It can never replicate and it can't be as good, and the IOD understand that as what Stats Jersey do, but all forms of extra data, extra understanding are very, very useful. Do you want me to talk about the minimum income standard in a little bit more detail as well now? Or
Yes.
Absolutely.
You're going
to come on to that, okay. So we would never seek to replicate what Stats Jersey do is the main answer, but we can always seek further forms of information, particularly working with businesses directly and representative organisations.
Yeah, okay, no, thank you very much. We also note as well that the panel received a letter on the 2nd of October regarding £240,000 of other operating expenses for intellectual property. I was wondering whether you could just give us a bit of a breakdown as to why that amount has been derived.
I was going to say it's not actually in my part of the budget. So the intellectual property work is being done through the External Relations Department.
I see.
You may know a bit more about it.
I mean, I do. I don't. It's you being scrutinised, not myself. But I am in charge of the intellectual property work. But it does answer to the External Relations Minister, who holds that from portfolio. That was assessed from a need to develop a new software solution to intellectual property and legislation work, which we need specific legal advice. It's a very specialised subject. We put in for £300,000. All growth bids last year were reduced by 20%, so we got 240,000. We still believe that project is deliverable within that £240,000 bracket, but we've just had to reprioritise a couple of elements.
Okay, thank you very much. I am also aware that there are a number of anticipated savings for 2025, including the elite sports strategies, and I think that was something that Deputy Stevenson was an advocate of.
Right, yeah.
And I just want to know, is this something that is potentially going to be delivered in the future, or do you think it's been cancelled out entirely?
I don't believe it's been cancelled. I would need to double check with the Sports Minister.
Okay.
Maybe Heath.
No, it's very much going ahead.
Yep. Okay.
Not just in this year, but next year as well.
Yep.
Like Thomas referred to the budget cut on that 300,000 request for intellectual property. Same thing. This was a £300,000 investment in elite sport, which has been reduced to 240,000.
Okay.
I attended a Jersey Sport Board meeting last night.
Yep.
And later this month they will announce so they've done expressions of interest. The process has commenced. They have formed an independent panel to assess how that money will be distributed appropriately to emerging sport talent in the island, and I believe the money will be distributed this side of Christmas.
Yep. Okay, thank you very much. Minister, I'm also aware that digital and visitor economy is part of the anticipated savings as well, and I was wondering if you could just give your reasons why this has been in place in the 2025 budget.
Well, we've been asked to reduce expenditure in different areas. And certainly with regard to ALOs, we have been asked to find savings shared with the financial services part of the Department of the Economy on a prorated basis. And so there will be budget reductions. To be fair, I have ensured that there are no budget reductions on the Visit Jersey side. Because as I said earlier, they've had the same amount of money every year for 10 years, which is effectively budget reductions in that sense. And so the £571,000 of savings that I have to make with regard to ALOs will come from elsewhere.
Okay, now speaking of ALOs, I know there's been some discussion among politicians about whether the government budget should be debated every 2 or potentially every 3 years to provide certainty to ALOs. And I just wanted to hear your view about whether there would be anticipated changes in the future regarding the cycle of the government budget.
I'm not aware of those. We do, though, ourselves try to provide as much certainty as we can to ALOs from a budgeting perspective. Even if that can't be a year ahead, you know, we'd like to have an ongoing conversation to let them know where we are around budgeting, etc. It does make it difficult. But to the debate we had yesterday, you know, as far as the arts are concerned, arts, culture and heritage, those ALOs, we can plan more easily and give them protection because of the 1%.
Can I ask, which are the ALOs that are going to face reductions or reductions in growth or just reductions in their grants?
So at the moment, and we're looking at main Digital Jersey and Jersey Business.
Digital Jersey and Jersey Business. And do you know roughly the order of magnitude?
Total amount is £571,000.
And so it's a reduction in their grant? Or
not each, between them.
Between them.
Yeah.
And can I just ask, will that potentially involve redundancies?
I can tell you that's not, that's for the CEOs of those organisations. But also, I mean, there may be restructuring, things like this.
They're aware of this, though, and you've been consulted?
I have, yes. I've spoken to both, yes.
And are there any risks in that, in terms of the knock-on effect about their productivity, viability into the future?
There are. Whenever you change a budget to the negative side, it brings some element of risk. But that's why we're looking at the structures of those ALOs and trying to understand if that's the best way for them.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry to cut in.
No, that's fine. I finished my section. Question 4.
Thank you. Thank you. Pass over to you.
Okay, thank you. Minister, thank you for the briefing that we had on the way in which you intend to undertake the research around minimum income standards. So it's really helpful. Can you, just for the benefit of the public, briefly outline the purpose of the proposed revenue expenditure minimum income standards?
My last
I was teed up for that one. Yeah. So the minimum income standard is a very complex piece of work. It's not something that is likely to be able to take on in-house, but we don't intend to use consultants either, or academic institutions who specialise in this kind of work. It's a large piece of work. It's a significant undertaking. It takes, now I don't want to sort of put the exact proposal down because that still needs just to be ironed out, but it's very likely that we would need social researchers to come in and run focus study groups, user groups, to understand what islanders think a minimum income would be over an annual basis. That's one of the most essential parts of a minimum income. It's what islanders think, and every country that's done this, and it's slightly unusual that a government does this, it's usually done by a research institution or such like, but that's the starting point. It's what people think should be a minimum income standard for people to live on in that place. That takes an awful lot of work, and that's by far and away the most costly amount of this, is that user group, focus study and social research that needs to happen. Once you have that good understanding of what that looks like, you can then boil it down to some equations, mathematics of what those costs would be. Once the work's undertaken and done, it is effectively done for a certain period of time anyway. So you think you can do this as a one-off. You can then understand what people think, and those attitudes shouldn't change over a period of time. Maybe over 5-10 years you might see some changes to that. So you shouldn't need to repeat that significant piece of work again for quite a while, which is why the amount then reduces in the future years as a more we're keeping up with what we need to, rather than doing the whole piece of work from scratch.
Thank you. So is what you're saying is that what you're trying to do is to establish a formula upon which this can actually
more or less, yeah. What we'll actually effectively come up with is a basket of goods of what people think is what needed for people to live a reasonable life? Even that question is a difficult one, which is why you need specialist social researchers to pose the correct questions and understand what people think a reasonable standard of living is for people on the island as well.
As I understand, it's different for different types of
Absolutely.
household units. And I understand that scenarios are built,
That's exactly right.
a 4-person household, a 2-person household, older, pensioners, retired
Yes.
people,
Yeah.
etc.
Yeah.
And so obviously it's a huge, what does one household have? It's different for everyone. So you're trying to create some generalisations
Absolutely.
about the minimum income standard. If I could also add that one of the reasons for the minimum income standard being a piece of work that the government wants to continue is, and I think this is really interesting, is the current minimum wage process that we're in at the moment about bringing it up to 66%, 2/3 of median wage, it's not seen as by many people, particularly in the business community, as a formula. That particular 2/3 of median wage is not seen by many people as a formula which talks to in any way how much it actually costs to live in Jersey. And so by doing a minimum income standard, you're creating that scenario, that formula of this is how much it costs to live in Jersey. And many people believe that it is better to adjust your minimum wage and your income support according to that information rather than the more esoteric 2/3 of median wage, which doesn't speak in any way to actual cost of living in Jersey. It just speaks to wages. And in Jersey, you have one particular sector which pays in the main much more than many other sectors. And so, some would argue distorts the kind of wage, median wage in the island.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I think, again, for the benefit of the public, the proposals that you're putting forward in this budget in relation to living wage, could you just explain what comparators you're using to establish those proposals in this government plan? Is this based on UK comparators in the absence of the fact that we've got no Jersey-based data?
In terms of, sorry, you're talking about the support package for businesses, the productivity support package, etc.
Yes.
No, I don't believe we have looked particularly at comparators. I'd have to ask Tom.
Okay.
I know that the Chief Minister made it clear that he would like to provide support for businesses as the minimum wage is pushed higher. I'll take you through the process. I did not think that the most effective use of any support would be just to subsidise wages. What I thought would be a much more effective use and much more in line with the Future Economy programme would be to provide a package which enables businesses to invest in their productivity and so reduce their reliance on wages. And so, if a business is struggling with higher wages because of the minimum wage, rather than saying, okay, here's an amount which bridges the gap for you and you're just paying that to them and they do whatever they want with it, what the package is designed to do is to say, here are some grants that are available to you. You need to show us how you're going to invest this in your business to make it a more productive business. That in itself helps us move towards the aims of the Future Economy programme, which is for a more productive island, whilst at the same time enabling businesses to, reduce the reliance on labour. It doesn't mean they necessarily cut labour, but going forward, they may need to hire fewer people as a result of having a more often technologically enabled and productive business.
Okay, thank you. Can you please identify how the expenditure will benefit businesses and employees and how you're engaging with the Employment Forum on this topic?
So I don't believe I have engaged with the Employment Forum on the productivity.
No, it's a different kind of approach. You've been
gonna
employing
say-
with businesses and business representative bodies.
So
in a
I've
different way.
liaised with
Yeah.
the Chamber of Commerce, I've liaised with the Hospitality Association, and so on, those sorts of representative groups, because this is about businesses investing in themselves, as opposed to businesses, paying employees more.
Just coming back to the issue about businesses employing employees more, do you think there is value in engaging with the Employment Forum on that issue?
I don't know how the Employment Forum could help us understand how businesses could become more productive. But that said, I'm happy to engage with anyone And if the Employment Forum felt that they had some information they'd like to provide, my door is open, genuinely is.
Yeah.
And maybe I've been short-sighted in that, it's possible.
Okay. In terms of the issues around improving productivity and then maintaining competitiveness, which you've talked about in terms of the support package, are there any particular areas where you believe you expect to see improvements in productivity and increased competition or maintaining competition at current levels? Because I think it's quite easy to just say we want to see growth and we want to see improved productivity and efficiency. But I think what we need to do is we need to tease out just exactly what are the benefits of actually adopting this approach and where we will expect to see those gains emerging.
So we have been particularly thinking about those businesses which are more likely to be affected directly by a significant increase in minimum wage. And so the general sectors there, you're talking about agriculture, fishing, they're being supported, actually, they're the only one being supported directly with grant support through the rural and marine economy support schemes.
Yeah.
They have, to be fair, certainly in agriculture, made significant productivity improvements over the last decades or so as well. But they also have a support scheme set up, so we know what the cost to them is likely to be. And the 1.1 million each year that they are receiving into their support package is equivalent to the amount that we believe the effect of the minimum wage rises on them. Outside of that, we've been thinking particularly about hospitality, we've been thinking about retail, we've been thinking about the care sector, the third sector, and they are the ones that we believe are likely to be particularly significantly affected. But that said, the gains in the minimum wage are of a scale that we believe actually has an impact, even if it's indirect, on all sectors in the island. So even the finance sector, which often people don't think of as being affected by minimum wage, we believe at the lower end of its pay scales may well be affected by this. And so the biggest productivity grant scheme that we're providing, which is £3 million a year over 2 years, £3 million each year for 2 years, is open to all businesses, regardless of sector. And for instance, the care sector, we haven't created a specific package for them, but they would be absolutely be able to go into the productivity grant and the training grants as well.
And in terms of actually allocation, can you just help us understand how the support will be administered and delivered to each of the agencies?
So the main delivery partner will be Jersey Business, and we're working with Jersey Business to make sure that they are in a position to be able to do this. We are going to have a kind of two-tier structure for grants, and that's in order, I think I said this in the States a couple of days ago, that's in order to have a faster process for small grants and a more significant process for larger grants. And at the moment, the threshold that we're looking at is £5,000. Up to £5,000 will be deemed a minor grant and will have a much quicker process, whilst having governance around it, but a process which minimises that governance and enables, in order to make it efficient. £5,000 to £75,000 will be a more significant process to make sure that the governance is there, and they'll be reporting back, etc., and things like this.
Okay, thank you.
Would it be all right to just bring in Deputy Andrews? I think he's got some supplementary questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Of course, there are potentially going to be some concerns with certain businesses potentially being mismanaged, and then there might be some fear that the government is then giving them grants. So what process is in place to ensure that businesses who are being awarded grants are financially viable and able to continue longer term?
That will be part of the application process. I don't know if Tom has insight into there, but that is what the application process is designed to try to, help with.
So none of the proposals have been completely signed off yet. We were hoping to go to the cost of living group, which is the governance body looking over this week, but unfortunately the Assembly went a bit longer than we expected it to, so therefore we weren't able to do that. So, yeah, and we are therefore bringing that forward early next week. We're just looking at the final proposals. For instance, if an organisation owes government money in certain ways, that's a good trigger point for us that actually maybe something's going on from that point of view. Yeah. Would they therefore be eligible for a further grant from government? Again, no final decisions have been made, but it's very likely that would find its way into the final processes for business applications. that kind of strain that businesses are going through that aren't therefore paying their government bills, whether that's ITIS or Social Security or whatever it happens to be, is usually a good red flag and a good trigger that there's something else going on. So
Would it trigger them getting a grant or not getting a grant?
more than likely not getting a grant if they're already owing the government money in through different guises, basically. Again, nothing's been fully signed off at this moment, but that's very likely. And just to make you fully aware, we're taking you through the detailed proposals in 2 weeks' time, which I hope is in all your diaries now as well.
I also should add, I don't mean any disrespect to the cost of living group for having just announced all that publicly before it's been signed off. It was it's my desire to be open with the scrutiny panel meant that I inadvertently kind of talked about that before it had been signed off by the cost of living group, and I do apologise to them.
Yeah.
I'm the chair of that group, so I apologise
Yeah.
to the chair as well.
I know obviously with this Council of Ministers, they are trying to get to grips with public spending.
Yes.
And simultaneously we see this £20 million package be out there in the public domain. And there's obviously going to be a few people who are going to be saying, well, why can't businesses go to banks and, you know, arrange borrowing arrangements that way? Why is the government having to be the interventionist here?
I mean, absolutely, the government doesn't necessarily have to be interventionist, but what we are seeing is that the government has decided, not the employment forum, but the government has decided to push the minimum wage up significantly higher. And you know, there's been a very large increase in the minimum wage in the last few years. I believe it's something like 40% over 3 or 4 years.
Well, we think it will get to around about 72% in 5-year period once we get through to 2026, which is a significant increase by any imagination.
And of course, there is always a way of economic thinking which says, you know, let's be very laissez-faire, let's just let that happen, and what falls out, falls out. But I can understand that the government is saying, well, we want to soften that for those businesses because we don't want business failures, particularly beyond the norm. And it is a government intervention that is putting the minimum wage up. It is not, you know, just the exterior economic environment that is pushing the minimum wage up. It is a direct government intervention. So I think that's why government is looking to counterbalance its own intervention with another intervention to solve that.
I mean, one of the concerns I would say here is this. Businesses are very much aware that the Council of Ministers are really pursuing a living wage, and in anticipation of this, surely then the baseline wage would be raised within those businesses, and it hasn't been. So is that maybe telling that they maybe cannot afford to transition to a living wage?
Wages have risen significantly at the lower end, and certainly when we speak to lots of businesses that we think of as minimum wage businesses, retail I think is a really good example. Often we think of retail as minimum wage business, and there absolutely are people in retail on minimum wage, but many retailers pay in much higher than the minimum wage today because of at the end of the day, after COVID particularly, there was a supply shortage in terms of labour. So the laws of supply and demand tells you when there's a labour supply shortage, the cost of wages does go up. And that has been happening in the economic environment. So in many sectors, there are fewer people on minimum wage than I think many islanders would expect.
And has consideration been given to what the sum might be saved from income support if wages go up, and how that might actually save government money as well?
Yes, not very much money, and I'll let Tom speak to that. But one of the, if I could just quickly say, is one of the thoughts, and I remember somebody, a politician in 2008 or thereabouts, saying to me, if we went to a living wage, we'd be able to save all this money on income support. You know, at the moment they were saying income support is effectively a subsidy to businesses, and that's how I understood things and saw things for quite a long while. But actually, when you look at the statistics, the figures, the income support, the reduction in need for income support is much smaller than people would have expected. And so raising the minimum wage isn't particularly reducing the need for income support.
That's exactly right. In-work benefits are lower than most people generally assume. I think we've been quite open in saying that there are going to be some possibilities of job losses in this area, as you would expect. We would expect in the current labour market for those to be absorbed very quickly back into the wider labour market. In fact, from a macroeconomic point of view, I'm not saying it isn't it's not difficult for those individuals, that labour being redistributed is not unhelpful, actually. But there's also a possibility people maybe temporarily, maybe slightly longer term, going on to actively seeking work, and therefore actually income support going up a little bit. And that's what our forecast actually is. That it won't be savings for income support, there'll actually be a cost to that side of the agenda.
Do you have a rough figure?
We think possibly £400,000 in the first year. It would be the overall cost back to income support.
Is that a cautious estimate, or is it an overestimate?
It's a cautious estimate. I think the modelling for this is difficult. It's quite complex, and we've done a lot of work with it. We've had it peer reviewed as well by an external partner. So we are quite confident that we're on safe territory. As ever, it's an economic model, and this is what we think the impact will be because of this policy.
What kind of jobs will be lost?
Again, it's very, very difficult to assess that, and our model doesn't predict that, but it's likely to come from those. So what we think will happen is that of this minimum wage, if you take that as a sort of 100% increase, we think around 50% of that will go on to price rises, hence a slight inflationary pressure. Around about 20% will come from perhaps job losses. 20% will come from renegotiation of contracts, terms and references like reducing weekend hours, things like that. And 10% would come from the profit margin of businesses. That's a general rule of how these types of things work out. It's what our research from about 4 years ago pointed towards and what we've applied to a lot of this thinking. So they're the kind of cost savings we'd expect to see feed through.
Can I ask about where, in terms of the 5-year rule, so those who have been in Jersey less than 5 years who can't claim income support, has that been taken into consideration also in terms of job losses?
It has for the job losses, and the Minister for Social Security, which I think is a direct question for her, has been talking about that quite a lot, in particular the extra support that she might want to put into that area for those people who can't claim benefits because they're below that 5-year period.
That's the £400,000 amount in, I believe it's £400,000. In the States, I was referring to that a few days ago. Because yes, not 100% of what we're putting in is for productivity, because there is this £400,000 which is there to help the Social Security Minister help those people who have been here for less than 5 years.
Yeah, but in terms of terms of the principle of the living wage, Minister, is it something that you support?
It's something that I've always supported, but it's also something that I think needs to be done in the right way. And I have long had a problem with this idea of 2/3 of median wage, and I'll explain in simple terms as to why. I mentioned earlier that there is one sector, the finance sector, in its wider, the professional services sector in its widest sense, that pays in general higher than all other sectors. If that sector has a particularly good year and lifts its wages significantly, then all other sectors' wages, if we peg the living wage to the median wage, will just come up regardless, even though those sectors may have had a poor year and not be able to pay wage rises. So you're effectively, by pegging the minimum wage to the median wage, you're effectively pegging the minimum wage to the finance industry. And that is not a reflection of the cost of living in Jersey. Yeah. But it also means that if the finance industry were to have a particularly poor year and its wages reduced, then the minimum wage would actually go down as well. So as I've explained it, by linking the minimum wage to the median wage, you're effectively creating a free float on the minimum wage, and it could go up and down accordingly. And that to me is not.
I'm guessing the problem is we don't have a maximum wage, do we? So you'd almost like a contraction towards the middle where people get pulled in.
Well, I think that's one of the ideas, but that's unlikely to happen, particularly when you have one sector which is so much more kind of economically large in scale than the others.
And so the change, I suppose, in nomenclature of maybe living wage towards minimum income standards, that's been done deliberately, I presume, and also to include other factors just than salary. It might also therefore include other support packages that the state gives. Is that correct?
I think it's very, very difficult I think nearly impossible to deliver a minimum income standard just through a living wage. I think there has to be a triangle of looking at tax thresholds and benefits as well, particularly benefits side of things. I think the household point the Minister made earlier is a really important one. There's no one household.
But that is a subsidy then, isn't it? So whatever we're doing, looking at minimum income standards, if it involves government giving money back to businesses, either it's making up for poor wages, essentially. Is that not right?
No, because I think, again, it depends what the household is. So therefore, you might want to define, should one person be able to support a household of 3, of 8 people? The minimum wage for 8 people is going to be very much higher than it would be for one household. So you can't do it just through the minimum wage process because of the differences in households, effectively. It does mean that you have to have some form of other element coming through. You might assume that everybody in that household who's over the age of 18 has to work. Again, that's a social policy issue rather than an economic one. So there's lots of complexity around it. And once we actually figure out what the numbers are, there's a lot of complexity around the social policy that needs to then be applied over the top of it as well. So it's not something that you're just subsidising wage in that kind of way. There are other elements of the way different households are made up that you need to take into account. And that has to be done through the benefit system, the income support system, effectively.
If I could say as well, the it's not really a change in nomenclature from living wage to minimum income standard. They're two completely separate things. The minimum income standard is a study into the standard of income that's needed to provide what islanders would see as a reasonable quality of life in Jersey. So that's all it's looking at is, like I say, it is the cost of living in Jersey. The living wage is, what wage do you want to help people live in the island?
But the two are linked in the sense that a minimum income standard might say you need, 25,000 to live.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It doesn't tell you how many hours you need to work to do
That's
those.
exactly
That's
correct.
25.
Yeah.
So-
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it gives, by giving you that picture of how much it costs to live, you're then able to look at, right, so what income is needed to enable that? And then government can decide, does it want to do that all through a wage? In which case, my guess would be, actually, because we know it's quite expensive to live in Jersey, actually, if you wanted to do it all through the wage alone, that would probably push wages up very high at the bottom level.
But do we not agree as a
You
principle
can do
that
income support plus
in an ideal world you would say that you should be able to, if you're working full time, that you should be able to live without any direct state subsidies in order to live in the island?
I think you used the word ideal, and I'd talk about that as being an ideal, and we live in a real world rather than an ideal world.
But do you think people who are working full time don't want to be living on handouts in order to be able to pay their rent
I
or
understand
mortgage?
that, but again, that will depend, because if I'm working full time, I am working full time. I'm a full time politician. Yeah. My wage is £53,000 a year. If I have 7 children, then my £53,000 a year wage is unlikely to enable me to support those 7 children. But are you, to argue then that my wage should be pushed up just purely because of the amount of dependence
That's
I
fine,
have?
but that's because your children are not working, so it's effectively
I
an
definitely
allowance
do
for
not
them.
agree with child labour.
It's an allowance for them. Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that that's where the state has to come in. So it's not as simple as saying.
But it's an allowance for the child. It's not an allowance for a single working person or 2 people who are working as a couple. It's an allowance for something else. But as a principle, can we agree that if you're working full time as a single person in Jersey, you shouldn't need to get income support in order to survive in the island?
I would certainly like that to be the case, but I don't think that is necessarily always the case.
And if that isn't the case, that is a subsidy to wages, isn't it, to a business?
If you want to look at it that way, I'd say it's more perhaps a subsidy to the cost of living in Jersey.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that. I thought we'd get back to basics,
like
but let's God forbid that we should get into any political debate.
Oh, I like these. It's good.
I think we'll move on to question 7. Are you happy to carry on with
Question 7?
is that all right?
Yeah.
If T was.
So really, it's just to come back to the submissions that we've received. And one of those, obviously, has come from the Jersey Farmers Union, and they have suggested that the decision to bring minimum wage to 2/3 of median wage by the end of the term will have a profound impact on the industry. And they're concerned that they haven't yet found out how the support funding will be distributed. How do you think this point impacts the economy larger, as it were, in terms of how do you think this impacts upon the economy in a larger sense? The fact that they are yet to find out how the support funding will be established.
Okay, I thought I'd been quite clear with them. The £1.1 million each year of this 2-year package at the moment is going to be fed through their existing agricultural support scheme. That has components which are linked to employment and the number of people employed and the wages, and it is be delivered to them through that. And so that's why, our officers have done the calculations to understand how much does this rise in the minimum wage impact the industry. The answer they came back with was approximately £1.1 million. That's why we're feeding £1.1 million into the scheme effectively to make up the difference in wages.
Okay, thank you. And will you retain political responsibility for the funding support to the farmers?
I do have that responsibility at the moment, and it will continue.
It will continue, okay. They've also indicated that nearly all the productivity gains have been realised in their industry.
I mentioned earlier they've been incredibly good at productivity gains over the last decade.
So, and they also say that further support will be required. Would you be prepared to give this support?
So we'll have to. That will have to be, I guess, a wait and see policy, because we believe the calculation we have done have said to us that the challenge to the industry is of a scale of £1.1 million, and we are filling that gap. So in that sense, should there be extra support beyond that? Not unless we see that our calculations are incorrect and that the challenge to the industry is greater than £1.1 million. But we have obviously, so next year's agricultural support scheme is approximately £8 million. Mm-hmm. It would have been probably just around 7, maybe a bit less without that. And so we believe we're, for want of a better phrase, filling that hole. But if we find we are wrong, then I'm always willing. I want to make sure that the agriculture and the marine industries are put onto a stable footing in this island. So I have no desire to undershoot in the amount that they receive, but we believe we've got it right.
Yeah, I think that's what's behind the question about what it means for the economy on a larger scale. Okay. In terms the panel notes, I just want to move to the issue around the hospitality sector. You talked about supporting growth and productivity gains in the hospitality sector. Can you just give us an example of what that might look like and how soon you expect there to be that kind of productivity improvement as a result of supporting these funds?
So we've effectively taken a two-pronged approach to the hospitality sector, and we're helping them to invest through both the productivity support scheme and the kind of tourism grant scheme as well. That will help them invest in whether it's technology or anything else within their businesses that will help them improve their productivity. And that will be, they will apply to that process as other businesses will as well. But we're also providing support to Visit Jersey, an extra £2 million to Visit Jersey, and then money for route development as well, I think £500,000 for route development. And the idea behind that is one of the ways of increasing productivity in the hospitality sector is to try to really make a concerted effort to get more visitors coming here, particularly in the shoulder and the winter months. At the moment, we have hotel spaces. We have capital, effectively, hotels and guest houses, etc., that are, used very lightly during the shoulder months into the winter months, etc. If they are used much more heavily during those periods, then that immediately improves the productivity of the industry itself. And so it's this two-pronged approach, the kind of direct investment support that other businesses will get as well, and a bit which is carved out for tourism. Then the other side of it is, can we bring more people to the island outside of those normal tourism periods, thereby putting people into the restaurants, into the hotels, into the taxis, etc., at a time when at the moment that capital isn't being employed. It's effectively dormant during those periods, and that in itself will improve productivity in the sector.
So some comments have been passed about it's all very well getting people here in those dormant months, but the issue of the nighttime economy raises its ugly head in terms of how much investment is going into it, how much further development you anticipate in that particular aspect of the economy that would add value to some of the things that you're putting in place here.
Well, again, I point to the fact that we've got the grant schemes available for businesses to invest in themselves, but equally, businesses, I'm sure, if Visit Jersey and effectively ports on the route development front, if they are successful in bringing people to the islands during those quieter periods, then I believe you will likely see investment by business itself. Business reacts to demand. And so once the demand is there, I believe you'll see businesses investing, possibly opening up dare I say, new nightclubs, etc., which is something I'd love to see happening. You know, if we can, it'll be hard to break the seasonality of Jersey's tourism sector because of the weather, if nothing else. But if we can reduce the huge dominance of this summer period, reduce the dominance, not reduce the summer period. It's really important. I want the summer period to stay strong and grow, but reduce its dominance by uplifting the other parts of the year. Then the kind of simple economics tells us that businesses will see the opportunity and then invest in meeting that demand.
It's not on our paper, but could I do come in if you wish to?
Yeah, and if I'm
No, that was absolutely correct.
Don't be worried about embarrassing me. No, Minister, that's not how it works.
Okay. we haven't got it on the agenda, but in terms of the support for hospitality and the shoulder months, has any consideration been given to what the economic benefit would be of a university offering in Jersey, which would actually attract an off-island student population?
Not as part of this work, no. I mean, that is a large piece of work which I don't think could have happened in the last few months. I was engaged in the recent discussions. There was the lunch about the universities, etc. And we are doing, as an island, we are building out our academic institutions, our third, tertiary education, those further education academic institutions. And I believe that we are slowly developing that University of Jersey.
But are we doing that for a local market or for an international market, which could actually...
Interestingly, at the moment, what you can see is aimed principally at the local market, not wholly. Certainly JICAS looks at the external market, and so does Durham as well with its training offering. But I am also aware of other research institutions that are looking at the island. They are themselves within the island, but are looking to build research institutions in the island, which would attract people from outside. There's one in particular which I only learnt about a couple of weeks ago, but which is really exciting in a very specialised part of agriculture. And if successful, if this centre is built, and I've got no reason to think it wouldn't be, would potentially attract people from outside the island throughout the year as well. And so, Chair, you're right in the sense that I believe academic study could help us in the way that you've described, but we haven't done any work particularly on a university, and I do believe the best way to develop the university is to evolve where we are at the moment, kind of grow where we are, rather than kind of building a box saying, employing some professors saying there's your university.
But is there a vision to bring in about not just the academic, but also the economic benefits, the seasonal workers that would bring in consumers for the nighttime economy, musicians, artists, that kind of thing, that would go with, more young people coming to the island?
I mean, there is, through the Visitor Economy Strategy, the Future Economy Programme, there is that vision to do that. It's not specifically around the university.
Do you have any more comments to add on the nighttime economy and the hospitality industry?
I think that's largely done. I think it is that twin track approach, then becoming more productive and trying to increase demand on the other side of it. I think the other point I would make, you asked for examples, I don't think it should be for government to tell businesses how they become more productive. I think what our job is to try and increase the amount of investment and make that easier for business to invest in themselves, and that's what this package of work actually does. Our investment levels on the island are very low compared to any kind of international comparison, and anything we can do to encourage that, which both the living wage and the support package does, I think is quite good economics from that point of view.
And do people see it as a stimulus rather than just trying to cover costs, or do you think...
Again, how people see it, we've definitely tried to completely shape it around productivity and competitiveness. Productivity is that trying to make the productivity gains, but the competitiveness is to make sure we don't fall backwards and become less competitive, particularly in the international markets like tourism and agriculture. So it is a targeted approach on those two arms rather than just a subsidy or grant. I think what goes alongside what we're trying to do is the messaging as much as anything else. We believe it's important for companies to invest in themselves. I'm sure they believe as well. And we are helping you do that. And rather than just giving straight subsidy or grant, we're pushing everything down a certain area. And I think that message and that we're supporting businesses to do that is really, really important.
With your finance, hospitality, agriculture, you have to continue to invest in your business if you want to stay competitive, stay productive, and stay, as a profitable business. So as Tom said, business investment levels are quite low in the island in comparison to other areas. That's one of the key things I really want to turn around. And so if government, even if it is only over a 2-year period, and I have said in the States that I think maybe, the next government will have to look at tapering it, extending it. Cliff edges are never great, but that's for the next government to decide. If we can encourage and create a behaviour of, growing investment in businesses within the island, I think that will be a real success.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We're going to turn to some questions about the Technology Accelerator Fund and the Channel Islands Lottery for the next section. So can you just talk us through the Technology Accelerator Fund? So if I've understood correctly, that fund is gradually going to be depleted over the next few years, with much of that money being transferred to the consolidated fund, but some of it still being used for its original purpose. Is that correct? Is that the best?
That's not how I understand it, so much as it's about, so the state's voted to have a £20 million fund. But so I believe, as I understand, the £20 million is still the overall figure to be invested by the fund.
Okay.
But it's being, that £20 million is kind of being
Reprofiled.
Reprofiled, yes. So the actual £20 million, the spend is over more years than it would have been.
Okay. So if I've not missed, if I've got a table in front of me, it's very small writing, but my eyes are just about
So
okay.
I might have the same.
So we've got an estimate. The opening balance for 2025 is 14 million. Should we say 14.2? Are we happy with that?
Yeah, I don't have that same table here.
And the closing balance is 10. And so basically the fund is going from 14.2 million in 25 to 10 million in 26, and then 4.2 in 27. Then
that's as it spends the money in the fund.
Yeah, but it's also got transfers to consolidated fund in all of those years. So is that just have I misread that?
I think I would have to go back and double check.
Yeah, it's not something I'm closely involved with, but my understanding is what you said, it's reprofiling rather than
Reprofile. So essentially that money would just gradually become depleted, is what you're saying, until
At the moment,
2020. Will it be topped up again?
well, I think that's a question we need to ask ourselves, and as the state really is, we voted to have a £20 million fund. Now, one of the things I did when I was a member of the last government was I realised that you're not going to spend £20 million in 1 year. So I asked that, we don't need £20 million to be set aside. That's stopping another part of government investing somewhere else in government. So I said, let's be more realistic about the potential spend in any given year. And so that's where we first reprofiled it. So you don't just have a £20 million block that you've taken out of government funding. You profile it over a number of years, because at the end of the day, Digital Jersey and the Impact Fund Board can only move so much money through the fund in any given year. I think we do need to ask ourselves as a state at some point in the future, it doesn't have to be now, do we want to continue the fund? That will have to be a decision the states make, because it was initially a state's decision, so I think it'd be appropriate to take it back to the states. You'd need to look at the an analysis of the success of the fund. It's too early for that at this moment in time. I don't think the states would necessarily be too keen to provide another 10 or 20 million without understanding the success or otherwise of the fund, but we are too early for that at the moment. It's an exciting fund. I think we are seeing some really exciting projects being funded, but whether they're successful or not, I couldn't tell you right now. So I think it is a question the government should ask the states in the future, but it's probably not now.
Can I just ask a question around that? It's interesting, the comments about we don't know how we're going to see what we get. Should we be really, really bothered by that? Because in some respects, what we're doing is we're investing in a fund to accelerate ideas. Do you think that it's something that the island struggles with if things fail, that they see that as a waste of money or as a waste of public money? How do you reconcile that perspective?
So Deputy, you've really hit a button for me. You know what I mean? I'm sorry. I do hear too often in this island a kind of critique of failure. I think that does hold us back, because that creates fear. And if you've got fear in your mind, you are less likely to take a risk. And when it comes to investment in any business at any level, in any industry, a private business investor is taking a risk. If we do not allow people to fail, or an attempt like an impact fund, if governed properly and if processed properly, if it were to fail, let's say we look back in 10 years' time, we say, look at the £20 million we spent on all those projects, only 25% of them were successful, the other 75 weren't. Well, you could say, oh, it's been a failure. But equally, you could say, what have those 25% of successful projects done for the island? That could be an enormous amount of benefit. In which case, you would then be able to look at the fund and say, actually, it's been a real success. Even though it's had these failures, the overall fund has been a success. And I think we really need to get to that mentality of failure is trying, not succeeding, but please try again. And I know it's something people often say about the United States, that one of their mentalities is almost, if you haven't tried and failed, then I'm not going to invest in you, because actually I want to see that you failed and learn from your lessons in order for me to have confidence. I really want us to get to that perspective where if somebody fails in business, we as a community want them to get back up and say, dust yourself off. We'll support you in getting back up. You will have learned.
That's fine when it's a private individual's money, but when it's government money that's at stake, where's the balance of risk for government, and also where's the payback for government when an investment's been successful?
Absolutely. I think it's exactly the same. I think government, in this area of government, it's not going to be the same in health or something like this, but in this area of government, the economy department, I think there has to be an element which is about acceleration, and that means a higher level of risk, and it means embracing that. It's about innovation. You don't try something new, you will not find it.
How do we claw back the investment? Is there a way that if we invest in a successful business, for example, or allow a business to flourish with a grant that they wouldn't have otherwise had, do we get what's the clawback that government gets for it?
The idea of the impact fund is that you're trying to solve problems that Jersey has. So a successful project in a particular area in itself will be providing benefit to the island, because it is solving a problem that Jersey has.
Can you give us an example?
I remember one of the first programmes had drones for air sea rescue. If that's a successful project, you've just made more resilient your air sea rescue fund. At the moment, we've got the care sector fund open. If you have successful projects in that area, you've just helped care become more resilient. You've potentially helped care become less costly. And you've potentially given better care to islanders than they would otherwise have had. So there is, in successful projects, there is going to be a payoff for the island, because the whole fund is focused on problems that the island has and is finding hard to solve. I fundamentally believe that in small areas of government such as this, you have to have an appetite for slightly greater risk than government normally does. But you wrap it in good governance, and the impact fund is wrapped in good governance. And we've really worked with Canada on this. So one of the advisors to the fund is a person who works in the Canadian government on their impact fund, which has been hugely successful. And we're looking at the governance that they have there, and that's what we've brought into this as well. And they continue to advise us on the fund in that respect as well, because that has been successful. And so I think it is a balance. I would prefer this is going to be slightly controversial. I would prefer to back projects that the board has looked at, proper governance. They believe that this is likely to be successful, so they'll back a project there that may help us in a sector like care or somewhere else. But if that didn't work on a particular project, I'd prefer us to have had a go, rather than to spend money on hospital projects that don't appear for 15 years or however long it is. This isn't current government. This is about past, or IT projects that lose money constantly.
I'll move us on. I
prefer to have a go.
Get the point. Can I just check though? So the last thing is, it does seem that you call it reprofiling, and we've understood that money is being transferred to the consolidated fund over a period of time for the budget. Will you look to replenish that fund so that the impacts can continue to happen?
I will look to make sure that the £20 million the state's voted for is what goes through that fund. There's no question. The state's voted for that.
Thank you.
But that can be done over a period of time. As I say, it doesn't have to all be done this year or next year.
Yeah. Thank you. So I'll move on to Channel Islands Lottery, if that's okay. So we understand that about 15 to 24%, because that's the margin around the 20%, of funding goes to applied science or research. Does this have any relation to digital innovation?
I don't, it's going off the top of my head, I don't believe it directly does. When we voted on that in the States, I remember it was Deputy Leader who brought that proposition. He was very insistent that it was about applied science and particular research. Now, so it was the application of science. I remember it wasn't meant to be, for instance, pure mathematics or pure physics, that sort of thing. It was about applying things. So it could, I believe, link in with digital in that way, because AI is definitely comes under this science and applied science, and you could invest in that
And
way.
do we know do we have any examples of how that money's being spent? Would you like
I don't
something in
have
there?
any to hand. No. I will seek to get some for you and
Yeah, it'd be useful to know.
writing.
I mean,
Yeah.
you know, we know a lot about the art sector and culture and creative industries, but I think this is clearly also something that members have felt passionate about. So
Absolutely.
I think we look forward to receiving some information on that. A digital economy strategy was previously in production. How does we seem to be moving away from the lottery now. So yeah, digital economy strategy was previously in production. How does the object of Impact Jersey relate to this?
So Impact Jersey is a separate line of work, but it's a supportive line of work when it comes to the digital economy strategy. And I think it has to be said that the Impact Fund doesn't necessarily have to support digital projects. So it's wider technology than just digital, but it definitely sits in support of the strategy.
And can we just talk around the whole digital? I mean, digital projects for the government of Jersey, and obviously Digital Jersey's been around for a while. Do you think that there's a full realisation in all departments, perhaps, and maybe in the wider economy, about how important digital development is for future resilience and productivity in the economy?
I couldn't really speak to other departments. I know that I am convinced, and the Department of the Economy is convinced, that full digital kind of realisation would help significantly. Both making it's a part of the Future Economy programme that the public sector has to be on this journey of higher productivity, and technological adoption in the public sector would significantly help that. I just can't critique other departments because I don't have the exact understanding of where they all are. But I think, as my general comment on government and its digital adoption is, I don't think we are where we need to be.
Yeah.
Well, one of the ways into actually trying to get a sort of digital economy was for everybody to have a digital ID, so that it would connect to different parts of government services and the economy. How much progress are we making on that? Is that still an ambition? Is that something that you see as part of modernising and developing and implementing the technological improvements that you anticipate?
So I still understand that a digital ID is one key, among others, to helping kind of accelerate digital adoption and technological adoption, is digitising the society. At the moment, there are two ways, and this is probably not helpful. We have two digital ID systems in use in Jersey. You can see that when you try to, for the first time, fill in your tax return, it'll say you need a digital ID, choose this one or this one.
Yeah.
It's probably not helpful that we've got two. I imagine a digital ID system is where we need to be, just one. And I believe it probably would be very, very helpful. And because everything we've been told is that it is, because it unlocks the ability to access public services online. And then others. I still have the ambassador to the UK from Estonia. I still have his words in mind, where he said that once the government in Estonia had digital ID in place, it didn't just unlock public services, it unlocked private services, so such as banks. And he was saying that, and in Estonia, a lot of the banks, certainly at the time, were Scandinavian banks. And they said, we can use that public sector digital ID that you've created to help people access their banks. So it didn't just unlock public sector digitisation, it unlocked private sector digitisation as well. And
I suppose the question is
how much.
I suppose the question is, we hear a lot around the digital initiatives and whatever. Where are we getting to in terms of actually executing and closing, the programme around implementation? Because some of these things are still just floating around.
I have to admit, I don't know. That sits within the Chief Minister's department, and so isn't something I have sight of. I can't answer where we are on that. I can't provide that answer, I'm sorry.
So there's nothing within the work that you're doing around any of these particular approaches that would expedite
Not that we're doing
or?
from our department, no.
Okay.
And I suppose we put this in the context of the earlier question I asked about the reduction of the grant to Digital Jersey. Any government plan really, I suppose, has to focus on the immediate balancing of the books, but there should also be a longer term vision and make sure we're future proofing. Do you think this budget secures both of those things?
I think it provides challenges for us on the economy side when we look to the longer term. I am aware that, if you look at, I forget the acronym now, but the Deputy Ward brought the proposition which enabled us to look at the government budget in a way that enables us to compare it to other jurisdictions. COFOG, thank you. When you look at our economy investment against other OECD jurisdictions, and particularly a place like Iceland, which I see as something like an analogue to Jersey, because it's an island, it's only 400,000 people. I know it's quite different in many ways, it's much bigger, etc. Our economy investment is significantly lower than most other jurisdictions' economy investment. And so I do have concerns about the long-term investment in the economy. But in the meantime, I am someone who likes to take challenge. And so we have a challenge of tighter budgeting within the economy department. That's fine, I accept that challenge. And we will do everything we can to make sure that we are efficient and as effective as possible within those challenges, looking to the long term.
I have to say, just as a States member generally, but also as a chair or member of this panel, I'm concerned that I understand that there's a reprioritisation of money for health, because that's an immediate priority, but health and the way it's being spent doesn't help the economy, if you know what I mean. I think it deals with people who are essentially ill and tries to make them better, but it might also deal with people who are not going to recover, whereas the other parts of the economy can talk about economic growth, but also about well-being and investment in that area. And if the investment is being cut now to go towards health, which isn't productive in the future, then we could be in a downward cycle where there's less production in future, less money to spend. Is that a concern that you have?
Yes, that is a concern that I have, because I do worry. I understand the challenges health has, but let's go back to the Future Economy Programme, because it lays it out clear as day in the Future Economy Programme. We know we are going to have higher health costs because of the demographic changes in our society. We have an older population which will be working less, and a smaller working population as a whole. So we know our health costs are going to rise. I argue that in order to enable us to have both a healthier society, but also to meet those health costs, you need a strong and growing economy underneath it, because you only generate the money to spend in your health system through your economy. If your economy is not functioning, you do not get money to spend in your health system, no matter how much you want it. And I believe we're looking at COFOG again. I think we're something like 27 or 28% of government expenditure is now on health. That is inevitable in some ways because of the ageing demographic, but we cannot solely concentrate on health, because we need investment elsewhere, whether it's in IT systems, whether it's in the economy, whether it's in education. I know education has some growth as well.
Does the bottom line, we've spoken about Scandinavia in different contexts. Is the bottom line not that we should have a healthy economy, that we invest in productivity, there's more money going around, but that actually for a good health service that needs investment, you pay for that through taxation or through social security? And is that not ultimately what needs to happen? Is that people are getting rich, we might need to tax them a little bit more if they want to have the good public services, including health services, and not actually cut grants that are going to the economy department?
I think if you look solely at tax rises, particularly at a time coming off the back of some very high cost of living rises, I think you'll find that you actually might get a decline in economic output as a result.
We're not talking about tax rises for people who can't afford it. We're talking about for those who might.
Tax rises.
Yeah. With taxation.
Yeah. Obviously, it is the preserve of any government or any politician to look at the taxation system. I would be concerned at the moment, particularly in our small jurisdiction, that you could actually score an own goal and end up with
could be
lower
social
economic
security.
output. But it's a really big subject.
Yeah.
You know, there's something that people don't
I mean, it
discuss
is-
much.
Sorry, Jay, can I just ask, I know there's been discussions, and we've had discussions around the economic impact of a unhealthy
Yes.
community in relation to frailty. And I wondered whether you could just give some indication as to whether or not that is reflected in the economic planning going forward. Where does that feature? Where might we test whether or not we're on track to actually address that very real issue?
I think it is always in the right. So I think the Future Economy Programme has become quite a central policy for the last government and this government. And it's not the fact that actually you can see the direct impact that's going through in any really cogent way. But what you do see is that influence of productivity feeding through all those streams of work. And the ageing population is our number one fundamental risk on the island. I think everyone accepts those issues now. So I think the fact that actually money has been reprioritised to health from other areas is part of that thinking, but actually the third strand of the Future Economy Programme was a right-sized, efficient public sector, because actually making sure that the island's labour is optimised in the right way, as in there's enough labour for the private sector to grow rather than the public sector crowding out is really, really important. So that balance between investment through the economy, but actually making sure that actually the right levels of labour and inputs are there for the private sector is really, really important
And
as well.
would you see that? How are you incentivising people who are on the older age, at the end of the sort of age spectrum, to continue to be active in the economy? What is there in the plan there?
So I think early stages, and again the Future Economy Programme is 2 years old now, nearly. It was launched a year ago, but we've been working on it for the year before that. This is a big 10, 15-year programme that we're trying to change things as we go, and you're sort of working through those elements as you go. There is a sub-officer group called Ageing Well, and that looks at all these types of policies of how we work through into a variety of different areas. And actually, I think enabling people to work for longer should they wish has got to be a major part of that, and you've got to look at other advantages around the world. It both helps from a tax revenue point of view, but it helps from their individual point of view, and in the longer term from the health cost point of view as well. So that's something that we definitely need to be looking at as we start going through those barriers. And we're going to be we are starting to hit that from our age profile now, but certainly over the next 5 or 10 years, we've got to have those kind of things in place.
When
But I
can
think
we
the idea
see
is not
some
forcing,
outputs
it's
of that work,
enabling.
Tom?
Sorry.
When can we see some outputs of that one?
That's not something I'm leading on, but I can go back and talk to other people and see what we can do on that. But again, I think this is a medium to longer term approach rather than we need something in place for 6 months' time. It's got to be in place for 2-3 years' time, but at least it's in our thinking at the moment.
Could I just say, so I think it's really important to clarify, society is a wide ecosystem and an economy is part of that ecosystem. Health is also part of it. I definitely see and understand how investment in health can support your economy. Yeah. But I also understand how investment in your economy can support your health. Yeah. I didn't want to give the impression that I thought it was economy, everything in order to get, but you do have to make the money in order to get the money. And so taxation, isn't it? You can only tax people more if they earn more. And so again, you need a strong economy to create those earnings that you can then tax. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Sure.
I totally understand that health is part of a strong economy as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I know we're mindful of time, so I'm going to let Deputy Andrews just ask the last question, but we may need to come back for some more information on We'll follow up with the letter, perhaps. So,
thank you very much, Chair. In regard to the Agriculture Loans Fund, the panel is aware that a decision will be made by the Treasury Minister, depending on any surplus funds remaining at year end. I think it's about £2 million that potentially could be transferred from the Consolidated Fund to the Agricultural Loans Fund. And I was wondering whether we are forecast to see that transfer happen, and if not, then what will happen if those funds cannot be transferred
I'll
to
just
the
read to
fund?
you what I understand is happening there.
Okay.
The information I have is that the balance of the fund at the start of 24 was £574,000 at the beginning of this year.
Okay,
3 million is to be paid into the fund by the end of 24,
okay,
with an additional 5 million to follow in 25, both made through transfers from the Consolidated Fund.
okay,
A further transfer of up to 2 million in 25, contingent on funds being available. So this might be the
Yes,
part that you were talking about. So
absolutely,
a
yeah.
further transfer above the kind of 5 million and 3 million that I mentioned earlier would be made in 24, contingent on funds being available in the Consolidated Fund as at 31st December 24. As I understand it, there should be 8 million in there, but that final 2 million is contingent on funds being available. That's my understanding of that.
You read that as 24, it's 25, further
Oh,
2
sorry.
in 25.
A further transfer of up to 2 million in 2025. Apologies.
yeah, no problem, that's fine.
Thank you. Minister, we know that you've probably got meetings to get to. We'll follow up with anything else, but can I just say thank you for you and your officers for attending today. We appreciate that, and wish you all the best for the rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.